Oh, yeah, he's unique. He is absolutely unique.
He was a genius.
Unparalleled.
The Concerto in A for clarinet was written by Mozart in Vienna in October 1791. It proved to be one of his last compositions. In Salzburg, 35 years and over 600 works earlier, Johannes Chrysostomus Wolfgang Gottlieb Mozart was born. Wolfgang was the seventh child, though only the second to survive, of Leopold Mozart, one of Europe's finest violinists and composers, and his wife, Anna Maria.
The conditions in those days, an open fireplace, and you can imagine the work of Mozart's mother, full day business. She was the first to get up to heat, otherwise nothing warm. She had to carry everything up and down, and the water she normally brought from the main fountain in town. There was no water inside houses, there were no toilets, no bathrooms, nothing in those days. This was the living room of the family, and Leopold Mozart, he was an excellent composer of the pre-classic music period.
Leopold Mozart had a job as Kapellmeister at the court in Salzburg, and his responsibilities really were for organising the musicians, composing, arranging music, very much a kind of administrative functionary job. It was one that he resented greatly.
Salzburg was ideally situated culturally by being directly on the route between the north and Italy. All the archbishops of Salzburg had studied in Rome, and they brought back with them very modern Italian culture. So the music that Mozart would have heard when he was a child in Salzburg was pretty up to date.
Mozart never attended school. He was taught everything he knew by his father, above all, music. His elder sister, Nannerl, was also talented, but it was clear the boy was exceptional.
It's andante, and what is interesting about it is this sudden change of rhythm from 3 into, and this. I think for somebody who is 5 years old and 3 months, this is quite a highly developed composition.
A 5-year-old shouldn't have been able to play what Mozart plays. The bones in a child's hand actually remain quite separated, so that the muscles and tendons are really not fully functional in an adult sense until the child is 10 or 11. Mozart's ability to play the keyboard, as well as anybody else, was physiologically astounding.
Yeah, this probably also created the idea in Leopold's head to start what seems to be unbelievable for us. In our days, no one would go on a journey without booking ahead. He did. The whole family left.
When he realized he had a child prodigy and an elder sister who wasn't that bad either, he thought he could show them off.
He felt he has a sacred duty, a duty to God, as he saw it, to show his amazing son to the world. It was nice if he could make some money while doing it, of course.
Leopold and Anna Maria spent the next 3 years taking their children from palace to palace, court to court, through 75 towns in 8 countries.
Most of Central Europe was made up of a whole multitude of little tiny weeny states. With all of these little states, there's a great deal of musical activity because each prince, each city wants to have its own cultural life and cultural activity. So there are many opportunities.
Our concert went off splendidly. Wolfgang is extraordinarily jolly, but a bit of a scamp as well. Princess Amalia, sister of the King of Prussia, was there. If the kisses which she gave to my children, Wolfgang especially, had been new gold coins, we should be quite happy. But neither the innkeeper nor the postmaster are paid in kisses.
The Correspondance Littéraire, 11th of December 1763. A Kapellmeister of Salzburg named Mozart has just arrived here with 2 children. His daughter, 11 years of age, and her brother, soon 7 years old, who is extraordinary and writes and composes with wonderful ease.
Wolfgang has received a gold snuff box and a gold watch, a travelling writing case in silver, and a host of trifles which I do not value very highly.
You have to remember, there's no television, there's no radio, no CDs, no anything. So if you are a royal personage and you look to evening entertainment, one of your likeliest sources of entertainment, some would be theatre, some might be music, and you'd have your own little band to come and play to you. And when distinguished visitors came to the country, you could expect to invite them to perform before you.
The Avant-Coureur, Paris, 5th of March 1764. Not only does he perform in a surprising manner the concertos by the most celebrated European masters, but he composes himself.
Voor een 8-jarige is het wel heel bijzonder. Daar heb ik er helemaal in gestudeerd, in geprent, in geleerd door zijn vader.
Dear friend, thank God we have safely crossed the English Channel. Yet we have not done so without making a heavy contribution in vomit. In London, everyone seems to me to be in fancy dress, and you cannot imagine what my wife and my little girl look like in English hats, and I and our big Wolfgang in English clothes.
Leopold Mozart, muss seine Familie bei den jeweiligen Höfen immer wieder neu einkleiden. Wir wissen aus den Briefen, dass er, wenn er nach England fährt, nicht in der Kleidung eines Deutschen oder eines Franzosen reisen kann, sonst wird er angegriffen.
The cost of taking a family all across Europe, paying for accommodations every single night, paying for musical instruments, is staggering.
Leopold Mozart was always complaining about being fobbed off with yet another snuff box instead of a fat fee. But of course, for the boy, the real value was meeting his peers.
On these journeys, Mozart met a great many other musicians and heard a great deal of other music. The musical experiences he picked up were enormously varied, and they do echo in his own music. I rather think that the reason that Mozart became such a universal composer was that he had this big range of experience. No other composer did this. All the different experiences were absorbed into his own musical personality.
He was able to absorb things with amazing facility, but he turned into Mozart.
He had this little notebook where whenever he had a musical idea, he wrote it down. So it was a sort of composer's exercise book. Now, it sounds like a very simple minuetto, but if you look actually at the second half, it clearly shows already Mozart's genius compared to other composers. Any other composer, well, especially an 8-year-old, but even older composers, probably would have written something like this. Nice and beautifully 4-bar phrases. Now, what Mozart does is, and he suddenly includes these 2 bars, which immediately takes it out of the ordinary and makes it a little jewel, a gem. It's something Haydn himself would have done probably at the age of 60, 70. And here's Mozart, 8 years old.
Diary of Lorenz Hübner, 29th of November 1766. From Holland they went to Switzerland, then to Augsburg, Bavaria and so on, until at last they once again arrived back at Salzburg, in good health. The boy is now almost 10 years of age. There's a strong rumor that the Mozart family will not long remain here.
Salzburg ist eine Kleinstadt gewesen mit dem ganzen Mief und Spießbürgerlichkeit und kleinstädtischem Tratsch. Denn die hatten sich inzwischen an ein großes Leben gewöhnt. Sie waren von Königen und Fürsten empfangen worden, hatten an deren Tafel gegessen. Und sie waren einfach andere, als sie zurückkamen.
Vienna seemed the next step. It was the imperial capital. It was the center of the political and social and cultural environment.
The Austrian empress was Maria Theresia. She ruled with the help of her son, Emperor Joseph II.
The emperor asked the boy twice whether he would like to compose an opera and conduct it himself. Wolfgang said yes. Can you imagine what a turmoil secretly arose? A boy of 12 seated at the harpsichord and conducting his own opera?
Vienna's local composers were appalled at a 12-year-old securing one of their commissions, and they conspired to ensure the opera was not performed. Rebuked, the Mozarts returned home to Salzburg. Leopold now focused all his energies on his son. Nannerl remained in Salzburg, while Wolfgang travelled with his father back and forth to Italy.
K74, I would have been thrilled if I could write it myself now. It's wonderfully talented music making. It is still formulaic music, remarkable to be written by somebody that age.
It's during the trip to Italy that Mozart starts writing letters. I think the character of the boy that comes through is clearly one of high spirits, sense of humor, very lively, a young teenager.
Dearest Mamma, it is so jolly on this journey. Our coachman is a fine fellow who, when the road gives him the slightest chance, drives so fast.
He was just having a great time with his dad. His obvious intense interest would have made all of these opportunities to go to churches and hear masses, to go to the opera in various places, terribly, terribly exciting for him.
The opera at Mantua was charming. The prima donna sings well, but very softly. She cannot open her mouth, but whines out everything.
Dear wife, praise be to God, we are both well. You know how Wolfgang controls himself. Whatever does not seem right to him, he leaves, and often he eats very little. Yet nonetheless, he is fat and cheerful. Wolfgang had to compose a string quartet for the concert held yesterday. Over 150 members of the leading nobility were present. You have often heard of the famous Miserere. It is so greatly prized that the performers in the Sistine Chapel are forbidden on pain of excommunication to copy it. But we have it already. Wolfgang has written it down.
Mozart must have had a most wonderful ear. Write it all down on a piece of manuscript paper as though it was being printed by a photocopier or a computer of some sort.
Travelling through Italy, Mozart also learned Italian, which was the international language of opera.
Mozart est pour la première fois confronté à un monde d'opéra italien, c'est-à-dire qu'il est confronté à des chanteurs. Par exemple, il va écouter l'Armida Abbandonata de Jomelli à Naples. Il réutilise en fait beaucoup d'éléments qu'il a entendus dans le Jomelli, dans l'Armida Abbandonata. Donc Mozart a cette faculté d'absorber, c'est vraiment comme une éponge.
Il sogno di Leopold Mozart in realtà era quello di sistemare il figlio in Italia, di sistemarlo presso qualche corte. Tentò a Milano, tentò a Firenze, ma invano perché i posti o erano già occupati o i rispettivi sovrani non intendevano assumere un compositore così giovane. Il ragazzo aveva 13-14 anni. Comunque Mozart tornò a Salisburgo con 3 importanti committenze operistiche, 3 opere che rappresentò a Milano rispettivamente il Mitridate, l'Ascanio in Alba e il Lucio Silla.
Mozart to his sister. I cannot write much because my fingers ache so much from composing.
Tu
ist sicher so, dass diese Werke vielleicht nicht so reif sind wie die späteren Werke von Mozart, aber es ist andererseits auch sicher so, dass diese Werke viel schöner und reicher und überzeugender wirken als die anderen Oper von erwachsenen Komponisten seiner Zeit.
In March 1773, the Mozarts, using income earned in Italy, moved into a fine new Salzburg apartment.
It must have been a wonderful feeling getting out of that tenement flat, that small, dark place, where no doubt if his mother wanted a piece of cheese or an egg or something, Wolfgang would have to stop writing a sonata and nip down all those stone stairs, and moving across the river to where there was cleaner air and much more space, much more light, must have been a terrific relief. The rooms were bigger, the light was greater, it was altogether posher.
A new ruler of Salzburg had been elected, the Archbishop Hieronymus Count Colloredo. At the start of his reign, he gave Mozart a position in the court orchestra. His responsibilities were to perform when asked and to compose.
Frankly, Mozart was not a particularly good employee. I mean, maybe we think he deserves not to have been a good employee because he was such a genius. But the fact of the matter is that even though he turned out a lot of music, he wrote very little music for the court. All of those symphonies that he composed in the 1770s were probably for friends or for private concerts.
Mozart, by his late teens, he was master of every going technique, every branch of sort of musical expertise that was going, every cliche, if you like, that was popular. And he was diligently assembling these in these extremely accomplished pieces.
It's fascinating to think of Mozart in Salzburg. It's a very small town at that time. These people weren't even Austrians, they were Salzburgers. You had to get a passport to go to Vienna. This is a walled town with very many people inside it, very busy, very dirty. The streets absolutely filthy most of the time. It rains a lot, you know, they call it the piss pot of Europe.
In a sense, the true Mozart breaks through rather late because he had this huge expertise. I mean, he'd composed full-length operas, he'd composed 28 symphonies and so on by the age of 18. But the first symphony today that we still really acknowledge as the true Mozart would be the A Major Symphony number 29, written at 18.
He was mature. He was mature from a very young age, I think. I have a theory that he's someone who lived faster than other people. When I'm trying to sort of see his life like as a film, I always see it in like an accelerated movie.
What distinguishes this music from other similar music of the time and the place is the really spectacular sense of energy that there is to it. It's not the least bit staid. I think we're dealing with a remarkable firecracker.
216 has an incredible amount of depth, and for me even, it reveals that he was very alive. He must have been crazy to some extent. So joyful. This man must have felt happiness very strongly and had a great talent to put it in music. Of course, he must have been a fabulous violinist. It lies very well on the instrument, but still, it's bloody hard.
Actually, such a pure music, and it goes just straight to the heart, and it's very, yeah, in a way joyful, but it's also very, very deep.
There is an incredible sensitivity and romance and sadness. There is so much sadness in the music.
I mean, how can a person compose this divine music? And I mean, he wrote so many beautiful pieces and at incredible young age, and it's just amazing.
Salzburg felt stifling and without prospects. But Mozart was in the employ of the Archbishop. All he could do was hope for the best, and meanwhile, continue to write.
If I were to pick one piece that I think is the first truly great Mozart piece, it would be the Piano Concerto in E-flat.
The piano is suddenly there immediately with a cheeky response. Again, the orchestra is saying, "Shut up, it's our turn." And the piano again says...
To have the courage to... The piano entering on the second bar, so not waiting the whole introduction of or exposition of orchestra. I mean, what a surprise. Now it feels natural and normal, but to do it for the first time, that's amazing.
The piano comes in with a long trill and sits there like this for ages. Now, not to be forgotten that this was a very high part of the Mozart piano. The Mozart piano ended here. So this would have been right up next door to the wood. And then it goes right up to the top of the piano. Mozart was working within the structures of the 18th century. He didn't half turn them around. And quite often things were happening when one wouldn't expect them to happen. And the last movement.
He's taking the conventions, but slightly rearranging them to produce an effect of surprise. But he's not rearranging them to such an extreme extent that he loses contact with his audience. And this is really absolutely of the essence of Mozart.
The origins of prodigious greatness and greatness on the scale that Mozart achieved is extremely rare. I suppose the only comparable figure in literature is William Shakespeare. It's extremely rare on that scale. It's very often associated with all sorts of psychological disabilities, which Mozart did not seem to display. He is not like someone with Asperger's. He's not an autist. He's not an isolated prodigy. His prodigiousness seems to be associated with a perfectly normal psychological existence.
In September 1777, Archbishop Colloredo finally gave Mozart permission to leave Salzburg and seek illustrious commissions elsewhere.
But he'd never been away from parental care. He'd never had to take decisions for himself. He hadn't learned much about the handling of money. And Leopold felt that this would put too much responsibility on him if he were allowed to travel by himself. Just making the arrangements, he felt that Wolfgang needed something of a minder. So his mother went with him.
Don't worry, my darling husband. Everything will come right in the end. I wish you good night, my dear. But first, shit in your bed and make it burst.
Wir müssen aber auch sehen, dass wir heutige tabuisierte Grenzen damals nicht haben. Und dazu gehört nicht nur innerhalb der Familie, sondern auch viel allgemeiner der Umgang mit Sexualität, mit körperlichen Vorgängen.
Dearest cousin, do you still love me? I am sure you do. Well, I wish you good night, but first shit in your bed and make it burst. My arse is burning like fire. What on earth does it mean? Ye gods, can I believe those ears of mine? Yes, indeed, it is so. What a long, melancholy note. Mamma said to me, I bet you let one off. I don't think so, Mamma, I replied. Well, I'm certain that you have, she insisted. Well, I thought, let's see. Put my finger to my arse and then to my nose, and Mamma was right.
It's clear from reading other family letters that both Mozart's father and mother were given to making exactly the same kinds of comments to each other. It's really quite unfair of historians or biographers or anyone to take a correspondence of 9 months when a boy is 21 years old and not terribly mature and make it symptomatic of the man as a whole.
I mean, most of us grow up thinking about kakas and pee-pees and wee-wees and farts and so forth, and in normal families that's a very substantial part of the discourse. And it doesn't mean they're dirty-minded. What it means is that they are coming to terms with the fact that we are these vessels of food and feces. And what's odd about that? And somehow the assumption is that if you're a genius, you should rise above it. Well, that's again a sort of blind-born view of things. I don't want to know about that. My wife and I were absolutely appalled to hear that Mozart talked like that. I hope he didn't talk like that at home.
Thank God we both arrived safe and sound in Mannheim. If we decide to stay on for a good while, we shall go to some private house, for staying in inns is far too expensive.
He was really busy in finding a job. He was contacting a lot of people, but he wasn't successful. On the one hand, there was this famous orchestra here, and on the other hand, 90 musicians. This was the size of the orchestra in Mannheim. That was enough for the Prince Elector.
You have now been away 8 weeks, that is, 2 months, and have reached Mannheim. How amazingly quick. If you want to make a stay, you ought to do so in a large town where there is society and where merit has hopes and opportunities of being rewarded. And where is there such a place? Paris.
Mannheim, 17th of January, 1778. Dear Father, I don't know whether I've already written about Herr Weber's daughter or not. She sings, indeed, most admirably and has a lovely, pure voice. She's only 16.
Mozart fell in love with Aloysia Weber and wrote some pieces for her and concocted plans, which his father objected to take her to Italy and make her a famous prima donna.
Where women are concerned, the greatest reserve and prudence are necessary. Whoever does not use his judgment to the utmost to keep the necessary reserve with them will exert it in vain later on when he endeavours to extricate himself from the labyrinth. My dear son, those happy moments are gone when, as child and boy, you never went to bed without standing on a chair and singing to me, and ending by kissing me again and again on the tip of my nose and telling me that when I grow old you would put me in a glass case so that you might always have me with you and honour me. Off with you to Paris, and soon.
Dear husband, the hall and stairs are so narrow that it will be impossible to bring up a clavier. Sir Wolfgang can't compose at home. I never see him all day long, and shall forget altogether how to talk.
You say that I ought to pay a good many calls in order to make new acquaintances and revive the old ones. That, however, is out of the question. The distances are too great for walking, or the roads too muddy, for really the mud in Paris is beyond all description. People pay plenty of compliments, it's true, but there it ends. They arrange for me to come on such and such a day. I play and hear them exclaim, "Oh, that's astonishing," and then it is goodbye.
You will have to fight your way through. For heaven's sake, exert yourself.
I often wonder whether life is worth living. I don't find much pleasure in anything.
My dear Wolfgang, Perhaps you will realize now the work, the efforts, and the daily worries which I have had to cope with during 30 years of married life.
Monsieur mon très cher père, I hope that you are now prepared to hear with fortitude one of the saddest and most painful stories. At 21 minutes past 10 at night, my mother fell asleep peacefully in the Lord. Remember that Almighty God willed it thus, and how can we rebel against him? She is not lost to us forever. We shall live together far more happily and blissfully than ever in this world.
His mother dies. Now, some people say that while he was composing this sonata K310 that his mother dies. Other people say that he had already written it. To me, it's actually the most dramatic piece he's ever written, especially the middle section where there's a sort of emotional storm raging through the music. It's basically all there in the music, and if you just follow the directions, you get maybe the state of mind he was in, but whether it was because of his mother died or because he was unhappy for some other reason, that to me doesn't really make much difference.
The letters that Leopold wrote to Mozart after Mozart's mother had died in Paris have usually been taken as the first and most compelling evidence of the breakdown of relationship between father and son. It's clear that Leopold increasingly adopts a strident tone, that he says things like, you essentially caused your mother's death, I'm poor, I'm a beggar, you're sucking the lifeblood out of me financially.
Paris, 31st of July, 1778. The Duc de Guines has already had for the last 4 months a concerto of mine for flute and harp for which he has not yet paid me. What annoys me most of all here is that these stupid Frenchmen seem to think that I am still 7 years old, because that was my age when they first saw me.
My dear son, unless you turn your present circumstances to profit and advantage to yourself, you will spend your life in ineffectiveness, remain unknown and poor, ruin yourself and me, and thus help nobody.
On his way home to Salzburg, Mozart visited the Weber family in order to see his sweetheart, Aloysia, for whom he had written a concert aria. Aloysia had secured a good singing position in Munich and was not interested in an out-of-work musician.
He had his great heartbreak with Aloysia Weber when he was 21, 22. And I think that was the decisive threshold to full maturity. That's why music he wrote from, say, 1779 has a new depth.
The second movement, I think, is one of the most beautiful pieces that Mozart wrote. I think it's so much inside, and you can, when you play it and when you hear the orchestra play, you just feel this ache inside.
Exchequer to the Court Pay Office, Salzburg, 26th of February 1779. His Serene Highness has admitted and accepted the most submissively supplicating applicant Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart as His Highness's court organist, and most graciously granted him, like his predecessor, an annual salary of 450 gulden.
Why did Mozart write the pieces he wrote? I think the one thing we can be absolutely certain about is that Mozart almost never wrote a note just because he felt like it. When he wrote a Mass in Salzburg, it was because it was part of his job as an employee of the cathedral.
In the summer of 1780, Mozart was commissioned by the court of Munich to write the music for a new opera. He travelled there alone.
Our drive here was most uncomfortable. For 2 whole stages, I sat with my hands dug into the upholstery and my arse suspended in the air.
I wish you good luck. Your whole future depends on this. Tomorrow is the anniversary of my wedding day, which is now but a sad memory. A thing you will not understand. At least, not now.
Pray do not write any more melancholy letters to me, for I really need at the moment a cheerful spirit, a clear head, and an inclination to work, and one cannot have these when one is sad at heart. If I succeed in getting a good appointment here, then you must leave Salzburg immediately. My bedroom has 2 beds. These would do capitally for you and me.
No further progress has been made with the family portrait, the reason being that when the days were long and bright, your sister was ill. I'm sending you a pair of socks by the mail coach.
That is a story from Greek myth about a father who vows to sacrifice the first living being he meets if he will be rescued from the storm. The first person he meets is his own son, and so he's thrown into this dreadful quandary. It seems the emotional investment that Mozart may have made in this otherwise rather formal 18th century classical drama is that at the moment that he was writing it, he was really in the depths of his own rebellion against his father.
Seguir
Mozart actually saw himself somehow in this character, and he was also solving problem of son and father. And I think that this is the role where he gave the biggest part of himself.
Der Erzbischof von Salzburg war nach Wien gereist, weil sein Vater krank war. Und also wird Mozart nach Wien beordert. In Wien merkt aber Mozart natürlich sehr schnell, dass er eben als Domestike des Erzbischofs vorgeführt werden soll und fühlt sich schlecht behandelt.
Vienna, 17th of March 1781. Father, our party at lunch consists of 2 valets, the contrôleur, the confectioner, the 2 cooks, and my insignificant self. I never say a word.
To an extent which we would now find quite unacceptable and humiliating, he was regarded as a servant.
For Mozart, that really was intolerable. He's someone who's basically very chippy about his social position. He's also arrogant. His father has drummed into him that he is a genius. Again and again his father has said, remember, your gift is from God.
When I went into the Archbishop, he rushed full steam ahead without pausing for breath. I was the most dissolute fellow he knew. No one served him so badly as I did. He would have my salary stopped. My blood began to boil. I could no longer contain myself, and I said, "So your Grace is not satisfied with me?" "What? You dare to threaten me? You scoundrel! There is the door. I will have nothing more to do with such a miserable wretch." At last I said, "Nor I with you."
I think he made himself many enemies because he was unable to be silent sometimes when you have to be silent. Other composers, contemporaries of him, have had much more talent, you know, in saying the right things to the right people, and especially in knowing when they should not say certain things that they think.
I have not yet recovered from my astonishment, and shall never be able to do so, if you continue to think and to write as you do. You say that the only way to save my honour is to abandon my resolve. You say that I have never shown you any affection, and therefore ought now to show it for the first time. How can you say this? To please you, my most beloved father, I would sacrifice my happiness, my health, and my life, but my honour, that I prize. It is the heart that ennobles a man.
June 1781. Despite his father's pleas, Mozart decided to stay in Vienna. The Webers had also moved there. Mozart joined their household and became involved with Aloysia's younger sister, Constanze.
Father, people are gossiping. Because I am living with the Webers, therefore I am going to marry the daughter. There's been no talk of our being in love. They've skipped that stage. If ever there was a time when I thought less of getting married, it is most certainly now. God has not given me my talent that I might attach it to a wife and waste my youth in idleness. I am not in love with her. I fool about and have fun with her when time permits, which is only in the evening when I take supper at home. For in the morning I write in my room, and in the afternoon I'm rarely in the house, and that is all. If I had to marry all those with whom I have jested, I should have 200 wives at least.
Directors have a duty, almost, to enliven the theatrical element, the dramatic element, to make it relevant to the issues of audiences of today. And the wonderful thing about Mozart is that the issues that he was dealing with still live now.
It's about being human, which I think always is the most important theme when we come in contact with Mozart's pieces.
It's musical drama. That's what opera is. It's an attempt to dramatize, by means of words and music, particular themes and issues of human life.
Which makes it funny is that Constanze was the name of his future wife. And as Belmonte is in love with Constanze in the opera, one can think that Belmonte is Mozart himself. The key moments for Belmonte in Mozart's opera are when he's feeling the new, never before experienced emotions of love, and he's recognizing these new emotions and is totally unsure about himself. What are these emotions? Are they good for me? I feel scared. Oh, I feel good. He's traveling through these unknown emotions, and finally in the end he feels good and he decides he wants to follow this feeling of love.
Jeg tror, han har ladet sig inspirere utrolig meget af sit instinkt. Fordi at der er så meget kød og blod i alt, hvad han har skrevet.
Il est clair qu'on est à une période, en 1782, où Mozart est donc dans une période heureuse de sa vie. Je dirais qu'en relation avec la biographie de Mozart, c'est certainement le bonheur, la joie de vivre et une très grande légèreté, une très grande douceur et une très grande confiance dans les rapports humains, en tout cas dans l'amour qui existe, un amour très pur qui existe entre Belmonte et Constanze.
On the 4th of August, 1782, in St. Stephen's Cathedral, Vienna, Mozart, against his father's wishes, married Constanze.
Dear father, despite your concerns, my dear Constanze is now my wife. No one was present at the wedding save her mother and her youngest sister Sophie. When we had been joined together, both my wife and I began to weep. I wager you will rejoice in my happiness when you get to know her.
Nachdem die beiden verheiratet waren, war es wahrscheinlich so, wie bei allen jung verheirateten Leuten. Sie suchen sich eine Wohnung. Die erste Wohnung ist schlecht und eng und unbequem, aber es spielt gar keine Rolle. Man lädt sich Leute ins Haus, Tanzveranstaltungen bei Mozart im Haus, die die ganze Nacht durchdauern.
Mozart was fortunate to have come to Vienna at a time when Enlightenment ideas of liberty and equality were making themselves felt.
Joseph II came to the throne in 1780. He had a very radical program of reform. Joseph had lifted press restrictions, and that really unleashed a whole kind of new intellectual energy. There's a much more open and tolerant social scene in Vienna, and for Mozart the effect of this was partly economic, because there was a new emergent middle class who were willing to pay for his services and things.
Suddenly realizes he's fashionable, and that if he's very quick he can set up a series of subscription concerts. That is, he can sell tickets for a series of occasions to his pupils and to the aristocracy and so forth. And for this he will then run up perhaps half a dozen piano concertos for himself to appear as soloist, which of course is very good for his reputation as a teacher.
No question that he was raking it in. Mozart was constantly giving concerts. He was constantly publishing music. The year 1782 to 1785 are generally held up as being the happiest of Mozart's life.
He says, I wrote this music with both the general audience and also the connoisseurs in mind. Take, for instance, this K415, the finale, which has a chirpy rondo theme. Well, that's typically the music everybody would be whistling in the street next day after hearing it. But quite soon after this theme, Mozart does something what actually never or rarely ever happens in a rondo or in a last movement. Music becomes slow, it becomes an adagio and minor. So it's suddenly a very deep personal music. I think both of these elements were there in Mozart's character, the general audience who enjoyed a good joke and some cheap and cheerful music, and the sophisticated connoisseur who wanted more, who wanted deeper music, more personal, more involved. And I think that's these two things together make up Mozart's genius.
Mozart was his own impresario. Mozart was responsible for hiring a hall, printing tickets, distributing programs, going to his musician friends, most of whom played for the opera, and seeing if they were free and getting together an orchestra for himself, running the rehearsals and giving the concerts. It was entirely his own venture, and I think this is important because it also shows that Mozart is not someone who's simply lost in music making and music creation, but is a fully rounded and actually quite adventurous person. And I think that the adventurousness that gives him the the strength to kind of create this new kind of concert-giving situation in Vienna is reflected in the brilliance and the aggressiveness and the attractiveness of his compositions.
Yesterday in the theatre, I played a concerto. The theatre was very full, and I was received again by the Viennese public so cordially that I really ought to feel delighted. I had already left the platform, but the audience would not stop clapping, and so I had to repeat the rondo, upon which there was a regular torrent of applause.
I think Foreman's Amadeus was a fascinating film, but I was outraged because it was so inaccurate, factually. But what seems to me fundamentally true about the movie is that it presents Mozart as not just a lively person, but as essentially a performer. So that when Mozart is presenting himself to a court, he's performing. When Mozart plays, of course, he is performing. When Mozart lives his life, he is performing. But more important than that, as a creative artist, Mozart is performing. When he writes a piece of music, he's not writing according to some rules, he's not writing according to any preconceived notion of what's correct and what's incorrect. He is being a performer. He's writing the best piece of music that he can that will astound and amaze the audience and keep them on their edge of their seats.
Er hat sich um 6 Uhr in der Früh rasieren und frisieren lassen. Er ist dann entweder hinausgefahren, um seine Unterrichte zu geben, seinen adeligen Schülerinnen, die ihm ja sehr hoch bezahlt haben für diese Arbeit, oder er hat natürlich auch am Vormittag komponiert. Der Nachmittag war meistens dem Spiel gewidmet. Er ist hinausgefahren in den Prater, hat Billard gespielt oder er hat in einem Wirtshaus oder in einem Kaffeehaus andere Spiele gespielt. Man weiß nicht sehr viel über seine Frau Constanze. Sie war sicher auf der einen Seite eine ideale Partnerin für ihn. Sie hat mit ihm sehr viel Billard gespielt, sie hat sicher mit ihm Karten gespielt.
Constanze has a decent soprano voice, and Mozart wrote some music for her. He wrote for her the soprano parts in one of his greatest works, his Mass in C minor.
Vienna, 12th of April, 1783. My wife is in such excellent health. All women should thank God if they are so fortunate in their pregnancy. 3rd of May, 1783. Dearest Father, the weather is lovely. We have taken our lunch out of doors and shall stay on until the evening. My whole company consists of my little wife, who is pregnant, and hers consists of her little husband, who is not pregnant, but fat and flourishing.
Es gibt diese Stelle in dem D-Moll-Streichquartett, wo Mozart selber sagt, er habe in dem einen Satz die Geburtswehen seiner Frau Constanze ausgedrückt. Ich muss ehrlich sagen, wenn ich mit der Partitur in der Hand den in Frage kommenden Satz mir anhöre, ich kann nicht die Stelle finden, wo ich sagen könnte, aha, dieses ist jetzt die Geburtswehe von Constanze.
Congratulations, Father, you are a grandpapa. Yesterday, at 6:30 in the morning, my dear wife was safely delivered of a fine, sturdy boy, as round as a ball. The child is healthy and has a tremendous number of things to do. I mean, drinking, sleeping, yelling, pissing, shitting, dribbling, and so forth. Little Raimund is so like me that everyone immediately remarks on it. It is just as if my face had been copied. My dear little wife is absolutely delighted, as this is what she had always desired.
The Mozart's first child, Raimund Leopold, who was born in June of 1783, died a couple of months later while the Mozarts were in Salzburg. They had left the child with a nanny in Vienna while Wolfgang and Constanze went to visit Leopold and Mozart's sister in Salzburg. And the relative lack of commentary in the letters about the death of this child has on some occasions led to the speculation that somehow the death of a child in the 18th century, when mortality rates were high, was less traumatic for the family than it is now, where we expect children to survive. What little evidence there is suggests that Mozart was firmly attached, proud to be a father, loved this little child, and that he was unquestionably distraught when the child died.
He must have been very affected by it, because in many letters he writes how much he's looking forward, how Constance is feeling. It's a very closely and lovingly documented pregnancy. It must be somewhere, it must be told, this sadness. But for example, just that bass note as a fate, as a question, and I think an expression of it's like a voice answering back. It's like a question, it's not resolved. We still haven't found the answer. And we might assume, that's it, isn't it? That's it. I was in doubt, but now I know. But another question. So in that, it shows us thought, a human emotion, which we all felt and feel. It's questioning, yearning and wondering about life and its reasons, its meaning.
I have works to compose which at the moment are bringing in money.
He composed a symphony when the symphony was needed, or an overture when an overture was needed. They did not just compose for fun.
The point being, he was writing to order. He was writing because there was money involved, because he had a living to make. He wasn't writing because that's what he most wanted to write. At this point in my life, I most want to write an opera or a piano concerto or whatever it may be. So he could turn his hand to anything at any time.
He was very busy writing for friends. He was very busy giving private concerts at which he played piano sonatas or violin sonatas or chamber music with piano. He was very busy composing music that was specifically intended for publishers.
He was an urban man, a man very much at one with his own society. There was very little feeling for nature in Mozart's music, unlike Haydn, who, of course, lived large parts of his life out in the country in a great house away from cities. One feels that Mozart is a civilized urban composer writing for gatherings of fashionable people. One somehow senses the stirring of the silks and so on in the audience.
Dear Father, I have something to tell you about our maid. She complains that she gets to bed too late and has to get up too early. Though I should have thought one would get enough sleep between 11 and 6, which is after all 7 hours. We ourselves do not go to sleep until midnight, and we get up at 5:30 or even 5 as we go to the Augarten almost every morning. And what is she to do? To clear the table, hand round the dishes, and take them away and help my wife to dress and undress. She cannot even light a fire, let alone make coffee. Twice when we were out, a certain Herr Johannes came to our quarters, ordered in wine, and the girl, who is not accustomed to drinking it, swilled so heavily that she couldn't walk without support, and the second time she was sick all over the bed.
In September 1784, another son was born, Carl Thomas, who would survive to adulthood. Mozart, Constanze, and the new baby moved to a bigger apartment.
You can see a prosperous middle-class entrepreneur. You can imagine him setting up there to receive his important guests, run his not inconsiderable business.
He always received me very hospitably and warmly. He particularly loved drinking punch, and I saw him drinking an awful lot of punch. He was also a passionate billiard player and had a billiard table in his house, in this room. He said, I played lots and lots of billiards with him, and I always lost. This is actually original, and this was officially his study. This cost him 480 florins a year, but He earned between 2,000 and 6,000 florins, which is anything between 44,000 and 132,000 euro. I mean, phenomenal. His sister said this was the best portrait that she knew of Mozart. I mean, he was certainly under 5 foot. It must have been extraordinary looking as a person. Very thin and very pale, with a mass of blonde hair, of which he was a little proud.
He was very particular in the way he looked. I mean, if you see this inventory of the household when he died, the amount of silk embroidered costumes and evening coats and trousers, I mean, he was quite fuzzy about the way he looked and came across to people, but at the same time, he needed probably to blow off steam. He was an extreme hard worker. If you just see the sheer amount of paper he filled with notes in his not too long life, I mean, it's an amazing amount of music he wrote.
Wir wissen, dass sich durch die Freunde überhaupt nicht stören ließ, dass im Kaffeehaus komponiert hat. Beim Billardspielen, wenn gewartet hat, hat komponiert. Und hatte auch auf Reisen, hatte immer ein Blatt Papier bei sich und etwas zu schreiben und hat seine kompositorischen Einfälle niedergeschrieben.
The thing to understand about Mozart is his artistic ambition, his seriousness of purpose, his self-critical faculties. And I think that's always the same with great artists. I think there's always a myth of it being very easy for people. I mean, if going to the other extreme, you think of Lennon and McCartney, and the reason they were the great pop group of the 1960s was actually because they took it incredibly seriously. And in a very, very different way, that's true of Mozart.
Mozart obviously regarded Haydn as the one composer of the day who really was on his level and perhaps his peer. And he writes these quartets in some fear and trembling, one thinks, which in a way knocks on the head the myth that everything was perfectly conceived in his head before he put a note down on paper. In those quartets he really was trying very hard, and Haydn was duly impressed and made his famous remark afterwards to Leopold Mozart, which must have felt like the justification of Leopold's entire life. Haydn said, "Before God and as an honest man, your son is the greatest composer known to me in person or by reputation. He has taste, and what is more, the most profound knowledge of composition."
Restless music, so full of angst and fright, and it must have been one of the first examples of that kind of music in music history, and I just get goosebumps when I think about it. It's like masses of people just moving around, and he uses very small intervals but very restless figurations all the time, and it's on the edge of exploding. And then out of that comes the entry of the piano, which is so different, so much freer, big intervals, and it's like this one human being in the middle of it.
Salzburg, the 3rd of November 1785. Dear daughter, the journalist Hübner met me a few days ago and said, "It really is astonishing to see what a number of compositions your son is publishing." I had nothing to say, as I knew nothing, for it was more than 6 weeks since I had had a letter from your brother.
Obviously, there's so many wonderful Mozart concertos, but one of my favorites is the K491. Everything is so dramatic. It's like a Mozart opera that obviously that you can think about whatever you like to think. You know, some dark place, and then people are wandering around to try to find the lights, or to try to find a way to get out from this big jungle or dark places, which it's hard to get out. And then obviously when piano comes, it's a little bit like a little girl, you know, and standing somewhere and get confused. And then obviously this second movement is, I think this is what we call love song. But this is, you know, you don't see your lover yet, but it's like whoever waiting there for love. It's like that. Mozart is full with the drama, which is sometimes it's really dangerous and sometimes very nervous and sometimes very peaceful. And then somehow you see all kinds of different characters. Old man, a nice lady, a bad guy. And you know, this is very theater-like.
Mozart's work was driven by demand. And, you know, if he was writing a series of piano concertos for a subscription series, and then the opportunity, the long-looked-for opportunity to write another comic opera, which is what he wanted to do perhaps most of all at this stage, then he would rapidly pack off those piano concertos and the next day would sit down and start the opera. At this point, he meets Lorenzo da Ponte, a very colourful, rather louche figure who went through about 15 different professions. But he proved to be the man Mozart was looking for. Mozart clearly feels that the success of an opera depends on finding the right librettist, the man who writes the words, that true phoenix, as he calls him. He and Mozart seem to have, between them, found a new operatic pace, a sort of new naturalness.
The story of Figaro is one of the servant Figaro who finds himself in the service of the Count. The opera begins with Figaro celebrating the fact that he's about to get married. He is completely happy that Susanna will be his wife within a day. Figaro suddenly realizes that the plans that the Count has are not the plans of a man who has good intents towards Susanna. And that moment, we're entered upon not only a sexual confrontation, but also a political and power and social confrontation.
Se vuol ballare, signor Contino, il chitarrino le suonerò, il chitarrino le suonerò, sì, le suonerò, sì, le suonerò. Se vuol venire nella mia scuola la capriola le insegnerò. Se vuol venire nella mia scuola la capriola le insegnerò, sì, le insegnerò, sì, le insegnerò.
One has the combination of a perfect libretto and even more spectacular music, which tells the story of human existence and of humanity, of love, of the petty jealousies and vengeance and all of the things that we as human beings deal with, both today and forever.
There is an authenticity about it, an authenticity about its tone, for the simple reason that Mozart knew about that world of social deference, the world which Mozart found himself in as a servant of an archbishop.
Della vostra saggezza il primo frutto oggi noi coglieremo. Le nostre nozze si son già stabilite. Ora a voi tocca, costei che in vostro dono il libato servò, coprir di questa simbolo d'onestà candida vesta.
He had that ability to characterize the person who was singing the aria in a few notes. That's one way in which Mozart is incalculably greater than all his contemporaries, because he really made characters with his music.
There's no question that he felt that the height of his creative powers to create beauty was focused firmly on how beautiful the sound of a soprano voice could be.
Where does this come from in a young man, this ability to express such complex issues and the way in which they would affect the innermost fears and feelings of a woman?
Manchmal würde ich mir wünschen, dass ich mich wie ein Instrument fühle, weil dann müsste ich nicht meinen Körper die ganze Zeit aufraffen und schonen und schlafen und gesund bleiben. Das sind die Nachteile dieses Instruments, das wir immer mit uns herumschleppen. Auf der anderen Seite ist es natürlich auch dieser unfassbare Vorteil, dass sich alles widerspiegelt in der Stimme. Alles. Vielleicht hat Mozart die Stimme deswegen so geliebt, weil sich die Seele in der Stimme widerspiegelt, ob wir wollen oder nicht.
Really understands how it is that this peculiar sonic contrivance, this sonic artifact, this acoustic artifact which human beings have made up, moves us to the depths of our souls. Certainly does in the hands of these remarkable people who are carelessly referred to as geniuses.
By the summer of 1786, his success had made Mozart many enemies in Vienna, especially among the Italian court composers who did all they could to ensure Figaro's failure. Even worse, in November 1786, the Mozart's third baby, another son, died. In May 1787, Mozart's father, with whom he had never truly been reconciled, also died. Mozart remained in Vienna, but was grief-stricken. Then in October 1787, in Prague, where Figaro had been a huge hit, he and Da Ponte were commissioned to write a new opera. Mozart was in somber mood.
I have now made a habit of being prepared in all affairs of life for the worst. As death, when we come to consider it closely, is the true goal of our existence. I never lie down at night without reflecting that, young as I am, I may not live to see another day.
Don Giovanni has had in excess during his lifetime something like 2,000 conquests of ladies, and he could not resist the temptation. When the curtain goes up on Don Giovanni, we find him at a time when his life seems to be on the skids. He's attempting to make love to Donna Anna, and it seems to be an unsuccessful attempt. There's a challenge by the Commendatore, her father, and in the course of their fight, the Commendatore is killed, somewhat brutally these days.
Mozart is always trying to push the boundaries a bit further, that we are loving human beings. We do have the power to hurt, and we do have the power to betray. He acknowledges the human weakness in all of us.
Di
concerned, it's a list of hideous, humiliating defeats. And many of those women would have killed themselves because of being dishonoured and chucked out of their houses.
Don Giovanni is not simply a manipulator, but he represents a great deal of what human beings are capable of when put in positions of power.
The great geniuses, they have this arc lamp of truth. There is nowhere to hide in its beam, but one thing it is not is judgmental. You say, this is a man, whether you like it or not. This man who's without repentance, and there are many more of you out there. This is a good man, this is a bad man. This is a man who's good, who's done a terrible thing. This is a terrible man who's done a good thing. Giovanni is just a man, a failed man, a foiled man, a man who, in Da Ponte and Mozart's case, is living at a time in Europe when people are challenging everything from society to the notion of God itself.
His awareness of what the consequences are, perhaps were the things that guided him to take the more moral standpoint of saying, no, it's worth pursuing the nobler, more honorable position.
Despite his success in Prague, Mozart returned home to Vienna, where his ambition was always to secure a respected and well-paid position at court. In November 1787, the imperial chamber composer, von Gluck, died. Joseph II gave the post to Mozart. But the salary was modest, and he now found himself in financial difficulties.
Wolfgang Mozart to Michael Puchberg. Your true friendship and brotherly love embolden me to ask a great favour of you. I know I owe you 8 ducats, but at the moment I am in no position to pay you back this sum.
Austria got involved with yet another war with Turkey, and of course a lot of the top aristocracy were intimately connected with the military and so on, and money was scarcer and times were tighter.
Das ist eine Zeit gewesen, in der das Konzertwesen in Wien praktisch zum Erliegen gekommen ist. Die Verdienstmöglichkeiten außerordentlich gering waren für alle Kulturschaffende. Und dazu kam noch, dass Constanze Mozart in dieser Zeit häufig krank gewesen ist und sehr teure Kuren gebraucht hat.
There's still this attitude left from his early years that he wants to live, he wants to be able to consort with noblemen and count them among his friends. He had a middle-class income. And the difference between a nobleman's income and a middle-class income was not just a little, it was huge, it was vast.
Man muss dazu sagen, dass Mozart auf der anderen Seite ja auch viel Geld verliehen hat. Also an Leute, Freunde, Musikerfreunde aus seinem Umkreis. Der ganze Umgang von Mozart mit dem Geld ist ein verhältnismäßig lockerer gewesen.
Mozart had previously joined the Masons, where he found intellectual and social stimulation. He increasingly relied on these Masonic brothers for support.
Most beloved friend, I beg you to lend me until tomorrow at least a couple of 100 gulden. For my old landlord has been so importunate that in order to avoid an unpleasant incident I have had to pay him on the spot, and this has made things very awkward for me. Our new apartment, thankfully, is cheaper. Most Honourable Brother of the Order, I am grieved to be in such an extremity, but that is the very reason why I should like a fairly substantial sum for a somewhat longer period. Do come and see me. I am always at my new home. During the 10 days since I came to live here, I have done more work than in 2 months in my former quarters. If only black thoughts did not come to me so often.
It's so lovely, this music, and it's not at all, actually. With this rhythmic motif which go all through this first movement, and like the 3 first motif, pararam, 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 like somebody trying to find his words, tararam, piraram, pirararim, and suddenly this giant interval, and tiraram, pararam, pararam, and then the same more private, pararam, piraram, piririm, 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 piririm. It's full of sighings, it's full of screams also. Tiram, tiram, pam, 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 pam. There is this famous phrase from Arthur Schnabel. What he said was that Mozart's music was too easy for children and too complicated for professional musicians. And that's very true. It's so simple. You have the feeling that it's so natural. And the more natural it is, the more enigmatic it becomes.
Mozart's trip to Berlin, Dresden, Leipzig in 1789 is sometimes explained as an attempt on his part to escape from a stifling situation in Vienna, partly caused by the war and the lack of concerts, perhaps caused by a certain dissatisfaction. Maybe he felt he wasn't getting ahead. Dearest, most beloved little wife, we did not arrive in Dresden until yesterday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because the roads were so bad. If only I had a letter from you. If I were to tell you all the things I do with your dear portrait, I think that you would often laugh. For instance, when I take it out of its case, I say, "Good day, little rascal, little turned-up nose." Today is the 6th day since I left you, and by heaven, it seems a year. I found a letter from you. That letter which I had longed for. I immediately went off in triumph to my room, kissed the letter countless times before breaking the seal, and then devoured it rather than read it. I stayed in my room a long time, for I could not read it or kiss it often enough. Berlin, 19th of May, 1789. How glad I shall be to be with you again, my darling. You will get on the very first night a thorough spanking on your dear little kissable arse, and this you may count upon.
The journey to northern Germany brought artistic, but not financial, success.
Vienna, 12th of July, 1789. If you, most beloved friend and brother, forsake me, we are altogether lost, both my unfortunate and blameless self and my poor sick wife and child. Instead of paying my debts, I am asking for more money.
Joseph II returned ill from the war against the Turks. Nevertheless, in July 1789, probably at Joseph II's request, Mozart received a commission to write the music for a new opera.
This was an attempt by Mozart and da Ponte, two men who are clearly at the top of their games, to write what is a very serious but at the same time beautiful and entertaining and captivating and moving piece of musical theater.
The opera was successful, but the run was cut short by Joseph II's death. Mozart's one-off fee for the music did not solve his financial problems.
Once more, but for the last time, I call upon you to stand by me to the utmost of your power in this most I beg you to help me as much as you can just this once. If you can send me something, even though it be only the small sum you sent me last time, you will greatly oblige your friend and honourable brother. Received 25 gulden. Received 150 gulden. I share your view about getting some pupils, but I thought of waiting until I should be in our new quarters. I must have something to live on until I've arranged my concerts, and until the string quartets on which I am working have been sent to be engraved. So if only I had in hand 600 gulden at least, I should be able to compose with a fairly easy mind. Received 100 gulden. Mozart to Michael Puchberg, 12th of June, 1790. Dear friend, I have now been obliged to give away my quartets, those very difficult works, for a mere song, simply in order to have cash in hand to meet my present difficulties.
1791 is usually presented as the last year of the gradual decline in Mozart's health, in Mozart's creativity, in Mozart's spirit, and certainly in his finances. There's this long slide after Don Giovanni, it's downhill all the way. But when you read the letters and when you look at what Mozart did, 1791 was a fabulous year for Mozart.
Mozart was happy. He was respected, popular, and lucrative. He continued to hold his court position, largely writing dance music, and was certainly still in love.
Vienna, 7th of June, 1791. Mozart to his pregnant wife at the spa in Baden. Dearest, most beloved wife, I simply cannot describe my delight at receiving your last letter, which told me you were well and in good health. 11th of June. When you are bathing, do take care not to slip and never stay in alone. See that Karl behaves himself. Give him kisses from me. Take an electuary if you're constipated. Love me as I love you. I kiss you 2,000 times.
July 1791. Constanze gave birth to their 6th child, the second to survive, Franz Xavier Wolfgang. Mozart now received 2 opera commissions. One, The Clemency of Titus, commissioned for the new emperor. The other, The Magic Flute, commissioned for the suburban Viennese theatre of the impresario Emanuel Schikaneder. It was to be written in German, for as wide an audience as possible.
It's almost a pantomime, but it's a pantomime with an ethical and moralistic element to it. So it's as though the plot exists rather like a Shakespeare plot on two levels, an elevated level with the sort of magic goings on at the top and a popular level. The extraordinary thing about Mozart is how he finds music of different levels to fit these. It's an opera in which he writes in every conceivable style.
People are often talking about how he must have been so involved in the philosophy of the magic flute and so on. I don't think that's the point. He didn't write the magic flute words, Schikaneder did, imitating a whole series of magic and fashionably pseudo-philosophical operas. There's no great philosophy in the magic flute. There's just some extraordinarily wonderful music which makes us think that the somewhat dim words are more important than they really are. It's all intensely practical, all a money-making activity. But of course, he could ally the most mundane money-making activity with musical thoughts of genius. I mean, that's the point. He doesn't have to have aims of genius. The genius leaks out round the edges while he's doing something totally practical.
Mozart lived until the French Revolution had opened. And you have to remember that the Magic Flute is written only about a year after the fall of the Bastille and shortly before the onset of the Terror. It's written in and about the period that Wordsworth refers to when he says, "Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive."
Vienna, 14th of October, 1791. Mozart to his wife at the spa in Baden. Yesterday I went to have lunch with our Karl at the boarding school. He still has his old bad manners, and he never stops chattering just as he used to do in the past. And he is, if anything, less inclined to learn than before.
Things were going well.
His magic flute was still playing in Vienna. Concertito had been a success. He had this great commission to write a clarinet concerto for his friend Anton Stadler. I think he was probably missing Constanze a lot, and that comes out especially in this low movement. Somewhere along the way, I think it's crept into the Mozart mythology that he sensed that that was one of the last things he'd write. I don't feel that. I think it's actually an assertion of life force.
Stranger approaches him in a rather cloak and dagger way and commissions a requiem, which Mozart begins to feel, he feels distinctly spooky about. I don't think he ever knew that, in fact, it was commissioned by a nobleman who wanted to pass it off as his own work.
In November 1791, Mozart fell ill. By early December, he was bedridden.
Constanze's sister, Sophie. On account of his swollen condition, he was unable to turn in bed. Ah, dear Sophie, how glad I am that you've come. You must stay here tonight and see me die. His pupil, Susmir, was at Mozart's bedside. The requiem lay on the quilt, and Mozart was explaining to him how, in his opinion, he ought to finish it when he was gone. The doctor came after he'd finished at the opera and ordered cold poultices to be placed on Mozart's burning head, which however affected him to such an extent that he became unconscious and remained so until he died. His last movement was an attempt to express with his mouth the drum passages in the requiem.